So, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. That's right, I am Kev Baker, and it's the right time, the right place for today's broadcast of the Kev Baker Show. Hope you're looking forward to another information-packed 2 hours of radio coming your way. And tonight's going to be a very special treat to round out the week here and the month on the Kev Baker Show, because it's been one of those months, isn't it? It's almost like we've raised the bar again, and we're certainly finishing the month off on a high note. We're going to put the icing on the cake because we're going to be joined by a returning guest tonight, somebody that on 2 occasions now has literally blown my mind to the point where I'm lost for words. And that doesn't happen very often on a network where we say silence is consent. That's not good for business, right? But that's the level of information that we're going to be getting tonight. And how many times have you heard me to the point where you're probably sick of hearing the fact that I feel some kind of subconscious pull, a kind of genetic connection, an ancestorial kind of link to Egypt? Anytime the pyramids, the Sphinx, all that ancient woo comes up, it's almost like there's a yearning to actually go there, something calling me back. And I'm not the only person like that. Something very mysterious and magical about Egypt and the monuments and what went on, when it went on, and who was behind it. And we're certainly going to be digging deeper on that tonight. We're going to be, creating new excavations, trying to get to the truth of the matter when it comes to the Sphinx. Now, to help us do that, I've got a co-host and a fanboy with me tonight, because coming to us live from a very rainy California is the man himself. It's Jimmy Jeans. And Jimmy, you've got a dual role tonight. You're not only my co-host on the show, but you're also a really big fan of Bernie's work as well, aren't you?
I am. And I've been waiting for this one for a while now, and I'm super excited. Can't wait to get into this information.
Well, I love it because Silimo in the chat room, he says when he heard me kind of waxing lyrical there, kind of all romantic about Egypt, he actually thought I might be talking about Elon Musk. Unfortunately, it's not Elon Musk on the show with us tonight, folks. As much as I love Elon, as much as I love Egypt, but I think we've got better, because we're going to be rejoined by a returning guest, like I say, Bernie Taylor. And Bernie Taylor is the author of the book Before Orion. You can check out his website over at beforeorion.com as well. And this is all about the hero's journey monomyth. It's at the core of stories worldwide among indigenous peoples, the ancients, and even our modern society. Now, Before Orion explores a deeper root for this monomyth by looking at how hunter-gatherers viewed themselves within the natural and spiritual worlds through Paleolithic cave art from 40,000 years ago. Biological time author and naturalist Bernie Taylor proposes that select cave paintings are fundamental pieces in the human journey of self-realization, the foundation of written language, and a record of biological knowledge that irrevocably impacted some of the artistic styles, religious practices, and stories that are still with us today. And like I say, we are going to Egypt and to the Sphinx, and to get to the origins of the Sphinx with our good friend, Bernie Taylor. Welcome back, and it's great to have you here, Bernie.
Well, Kev, thanks for having me. I've been on a lot of podcasts that will have me talk about just about anything, but they don't want me to talk about this topic.
Oh.
This topic is taboo. The Great Sphinx isn't taboo. If you go along with Bval and Hancock and their storyline, that's fair game, ancient civilizations, Atlantis, all that. But if you've got a different story, a story that you have proof for, they don't want to hear it. But are you ready to hear it, guys?
Oh, we are so ready. And, it's a topic I think that comes up quite a lot, not just on my show, but across the network. And I took a lot of my kind of education or kind of learning curve to get into podcasting from the owners of the network here, Chris and Cherie Geo. And when I was going through the air quotes here, I always throw up air quotes, Bernie, but when I was waking up and I was trying to get as much information as possible, Chris and Cherie, they were on exactly the same journey, and they were doing a show very, very much like this. And they still have a fantastic show today, but time after time after time, they would bring guests on that would cover the subject of Egypt And that's when I would get that kind of warm, fuzzy feeling in my belly, that gut feeling. I'd sit down, I would relax, and there's really something quite powerful to the whole Egyptian story. And do we even know the Egyptian story? That's the thing.
Well, it's interesting that you talked about it being in your unconscious. Well, Carl Jung, the Swiss psychoanalyst, and Sigmund Freud both studied Egypt. They were amateur Egyptologists because they saw those same symbols that you're drawn to, the Sphinx, the pyramids, they also found in the dreams of people. That's the Sphinx is a therianthrope mixed between a man and a human. And the pyramids are a mountain, a cosmic mountain, and the Nile, of course, that runs by is the cosmic river, the river of transformation. And so those two great thinkers, those great psychoanalysts, they were attacking the same question that we are today, but they could only go back to Egypt, because that was the oldest record that they had 67 years ago or 80 years ago. Now we can go back 34,000 years ago. We can go so deep into the archaeological record they couldn't have imagined. But it's the Holy Grail. It's the teacher's edition book that the psychologists were always looking for. And why are we drawn to why is there a magical Egypt? Why are we drawn there? Well, for the same reason we're drawn to cosmic mountains around the world, as we talked about in our last show. So this is the show that we're going to open the teacher's edition book on ancient Egypt.
Absolutely fantastic. And Jimmy, you are really not foaming at the mouth, but champing at the bit, shall we say, when I told you that tonight's topic was going to be the Sphinx, and you were hurriedly looking up information because I think you kind of know, or you've got that instinctual feeling where tonight's show is going to lead us.
I do, and I mean this topic is rich and ready for discussion, and I'm so happy that we're going to get into it tonight. So, the age of Leo is something that comes to mind because of the way that the stars form in relation to how the Sphinx is placed, and I think that maybe some of that may be relevant for tonight's discussion at some point.
Exactly, and we're going to talk a lot about Leo later, but to start off, to kind of get everybody's juices flowing, the ancient Egyptians, at least early dynastic Egyptians, didn't recognize the constellation Leo. It was only recognized in Ptolemaic or Greco-Roman times, and we find it in one star disk, one star chart. So how do we find Leo, the constellation, actually potentially the constellation of Leo in the Great Sphinx, but it's not in the deeper ancient Egyptian record? Raises a big question mark. That means somebody else introduced Leo into the record as the Sphinx.
No, that is very interesting when you think about it that way. When they were just,
wow.
Yeah.
So we need to talk about timelines, and that's the big one. And so this kind of the story of the ancient Sphinx comes to us first by Schwaller, a French historian who wrote in French. And we know the story of John Anthony West, who read Schwaller, and in Schwaller's work it said that the weathering pattern on the walls of the let's say the walls outside the Sphinx showed that it was from heavy rain, and that was not in the time of ancient Egypt. So John Anthony West read that, and he wrote a book, Serpent in the Sky. Brilliant book. I recommend it. And in that, he posed this question. And years later, he hooked up with Robert Schoch, who may have been on your program. And Schoch approached this from a geological standpoint. He said, yes, this is weathering that was pre-dynastic Egypt. Okay. And he came up with, first he said 8,000 years ago, then he's more recently, he's now at 12,000 years ago to be contemporary, as he says, be contemporaneous with the Göbekli Tepe and also with Atlantis. So you can get him on your show now to talk about how the ancient Sphinx proves there was an Atlantis. And that's what he's doing his shows now and presentations
well, Bernie,
and so on.
I think
I'm on a completely different page, guys.
Yeah,
I'm not an Atlantean. I think it's, and we'll talk about that a little later. But here's the oldest dating of the Sphinx. Ready? There was a paper done in 2008, and it was titled "Geological Aspect of the Problem of Dating the Great Egyptian Sphinx Construction." It was done by some Ukrainian geologists, And they came up with a date of 800,000 years ago.
Whoa.
Okay.
Right, hang on, Bernie. That shifts things a little. I thought I was, pushing the boundaries, going to like maybe 11,000 years or so. You've got Göbekli Tepe there that you can kind of use as evidence of other kind of civilizations that were creating structures at that time. But you're taking this to a whole new level.
They're taking, and this is explain the reason why, how they came up with this. And it's really important. Is that ancient, what we call now as ancient Egypt, has been underwater, and a few 100,000 years ago there was there was a salt sea, and there were freshwater seas in that general region. There's a place called Wadi El Hitan in the Western Desert that it's a monumental site, and it's strewn with fossilized whale bones. So how do you have fossilized whale bones open exposure in the desert? It meant that at a distant point in the past, the ocean, the Mediterranean, and the salt water had come into the desert. Okay, and so we have to think of the geology in the region. It's not just what the rains were in the last 10,000 years. We have to look at what happened over hundreds of thousands of years ago. And what these guys say in their 800,000 is that the outer walls of the Sphinx is due to wave action against it and not vertical weathering pattern from the rain. And they pose a pretty good argument. And this is what they're saying with that. They're not saying that someone 800,000 years ago made the Sphinx. They're saying that there was a natural formation 800,000 years ago that was affected by wave action against the walls of the Sphinx, which created that pattern.
Yeah, I get you. Okay. Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah, definitely.
Okay. So then if we can date those walls that weather pattern 800,000 years ago, then let's say the horizontal weather pattern in this particular case was the wave action, then the vertical weather pattern, those lines coming down through from the desert floor to the base, that could have been any time between 800,000 years ago and 300,000 and 3,000 years ago.
Wow.
Okay, and so it opens the possibilities of how this thing was done. So I respect that Schock is a geologist, and he went to Yale, and he teaches at Boston University, all this sort of stuff. But these other geologists came out with this. They said you can't date it that way, because the geology doesn't support this 12,000-year conclusion. The reason they came out with that 12,000-year conclusion, because it ties in with Atlantis, it ties in with Göbekli Tepe, it ties with the Orion constellation theory, and all that sort of stuff. There's no geological evidence that says it's 12,000 years ago, and there was never any that said it was 8,000 years ago, which is the previous story, because they kept putting it back. And so, deep respect for Robert Schock, but, if you're going to be a geologist, be a geologist. Don't pander to the Atlanteans. And that's why this is the conversation why the other shows are really reluctant to have me on to talk about this topic, because we're rolling over the log, and we're seeing what crawls out, and it's not pretty. Because these other geologists, which came after, they said that weathering pattern go back to 800,000 years ago, and they literally have a legitimate argument for this. And they gave this in the peer-reviewed conference and all this sort of stuff. The only difference between those guys and the Graham Hancock, Bouval, Schock crowd is that those guys are on ancient aliens and these Ukrainians are not. That's fundamentally a difference. But it raises the question of, so how deep in time was the Sphinx made? Well, it was a natural geological formation that was weathered over hundreds of thousands of years. And then what happened is somebody in distant time, and in another distant time, more recent distant time, carved out the head, and they reshaped the body. But there are weathering patterns on the sides of the Sphinx that also go back to a distant time that could be tens, at least maybe hundreds of thousands of years ago too, through the same sort of weathering that we had with the walls of the Sphinx. And it could be anywhere between 3,000 and 800,000 years ago.
Wow. I mean, I'm looking at it now, and the lines, I mean, they've always kind of intrigued me, and it's always been very hard to deny that that's definitely some kind of water erosion.
It's water.
Yeah, exactly.
Here's the deal. The Egyptologists actually say it's water.
Yeah, and it's just hard, This is why I like having new theories, new ideas on here, Bernie, because, you know, we can't just kind of become like the halls of academia where we just hear the same thing over and over again. I think we have to look at all the various options because nobody has that definitive truth, be it the people you have mentioned. And I'm quite interested to hear more of what you're laying out here because this is all new to me. This takes things way, way, way kind of different direction.
Exactly. So fundamentally, we cannot date the Great Sphinx at Giza. Cannot be done with any of the current scientific methods. We can take guesses between 3,000 and 800,000 years ago. That's just about it. But what we can do is we can look into the archaeological record to see what is truly the origin of the Great Sphinx. So everybody assumes that it is the oldest Sphinx, but it's not. There's an earlier Great Sphinx that this Giza Sphinx was modeled from, and that can tell us where this information came from, how they came to this idea of the theanthrope, the mix of the man and the lion, and that's super important. It also ties in the constellations. But before we go there, there's another point we got to bring up, is that why would anybody be reluctant to go past 12,000 years? What's the big 12? What happened 12,000 years ago?
The flood.
The flood, the so-called flood, was 12,000 years ago, and the whole so-called story of Atlantis, right? So in Plato's Atlantis, roughly 12,000 years ago, there was the ancient city of Atlantis was. They were doing horrible things. They were enslaving people, and they got conquered by the Greeks as well as the gods, which sent floods and earthquakes and things like that. And that same Atlantean crowd always points to Plato and say Plato is the source. It is the original source of Atlantis. But you know, it isn't. There's an earlier source, and those guys know it. There's a source that predates Plato. There's a historian that wrote about the Atlantes before Plato, and his name is Herodotus. And he wrote it in the histories. And he doesn't tell the story that some island that the Greeks conquered and ravaged by flood and earthquakes. He tells a slightly different story. And he talks about Atlantis from a mountain. And the mountain is called Atlas. I'm going to read off right out of the histories, okay? Okay. And it's chapter 182-185. And anybody can look this up. They can Google it online. Near the salt, and he's talking about the Western North Africa in this case. He's talking about Garamatians and all these other people who we now call the Berbers. Near the salt is a mountain called Atlas, very taper and round, so lofty, moreover, that the top, it is said, cannot be seen. The clouds never quitting it either summer or winter, the natives call the pillar of heaven, and they themselves take their name from it, being called, take a guess.
Atlantis.
Atlantes.
Whoa.
So before Plato, there was Herodotus. And Herodotus wrote in the histories that the so-called Atlantes this magical civilization that we talk about today, or no, I don't know if you talk about today, was really a people that lived around Mount Atlas. And that's the mountain we now call Geopolitics in Western North Africa and Morocco. And people still live there, and they still refer to themselves, they still call themselves the Atlantes. And they have all the myths of the Greeks and so forth that we talk about. And we're going to get back to them later. But the Atlantes refer to themselves as being, actually, Herodotus talks about the Atlantes as being extends the ridge itself, which is this Atlas Mountains, extends as far as the Pillars of Hercules, which of course goes back to the Plato story. It talks about beyond the Pillars of Hercules in that region. And so we're now talking about a historian that we have a record of that's saying there was an Atlantis before Plato's Atlantis, but it wasn't a sea culture, but rather people that lived around Mount Atlas. Now, here's something interesting. 12,000 years ago, and I don't believe Atlantis was 12,000 years ago, but that area was covered by water around Atlantis. I'm sorry, Mount Atlas, Jebel Tobacco, because this greater Sahara region had huge lakes, greater than the Great Lakes of the United States, and it was a wetlands. And you can go to the Saharan desert today, and you can see images on the rocks of crocodiles and hippos and elephants and giraffe and all these other savanna animals, because they're telling us from a distant point in time. And those lakes kept in the record to about, let's say, 7,000 years ago. We had big lakes out there. And so you could have actually, if you were going to travel across the Sahara 8,000 years ago, you could have taken part of that journey where you had to take in a boat. So there was a water type of culture, but it wasn't this magical thing that Edward Casey came up with about the Atlantes with their crystal ray guns and spaceships and all that other stuff that you just Google and it pops up, right? So we've got a record, we've got evidence that there wasn't another Atlantes that was before Plato, and these people called themselves Atlantes, and they still have the myths today among the Berbers. So so by this discussion right now, us having that's saying that there was another Atlantis, and there was a distant dating of the Sphinx, it fundamentally turns over that whole argument of 12,000 years ago of this great civilization that disappeared through the gods, the floods, and the earthquakes, and the heroic Greeks. So that's this discussion is like taboo. This is not what a lot of people want to hear. I'm going to tell you, because I've already been told that. But we have the evidence for it. Jimmy, have you heard this before?
Well, Jimmy's just returned back. He had to go and do something there. But basically what Bernie's been talking about, Jimmy, I know you were catching up there, but we're taking Atlantis further than the Plato tale back to, is it Herodotus?
Herodotus.
Yeah, his talk of a mountain and the pillar and a people that called them or said they came from Atlantes.
Well, they were Atlantes. They said that is the location, they say. They say we are the Atlantes, and this is our place at Mount Atlas.
Well, I've always, I've seen information in the past, and I'm pretty sure I feel strongly enough intrinsically about it without having to prove it in any way for myself. But I've heard tell of the Atlantis philosophy being a civilization and not necessarily tied to a specific place, but as a way of living across the planet, wherever it was and wherever it is, that it was already in motion as a civilization. So I think this totally makes sense with what you're saying. For me also, it resonates on a lot of levels, because Egypt is pretty much the source of a lot of the things that I'm interested in. I'm interested in the Emerald Tablets of Thoth and the tales of Thoth the Atlantean. And so I don't think the timelines that we've been given or the history of the Earth as it's been laid out, I think it's more to promote certain,
Well, let me jump in here, because we're about to go to the break. But timelines, and that's certainly something that we've opened up here in the first segment tonight. We've learned about this new kind of earlier Atlantis, shall we say. And we're going to come back after the break. We're going to build upon this, and we're going to give you the alternative origin of the Sphinx. And I'm engrossed so far. We're talking about a window of time that took us back there 800,000 years, and the weathering, the shaping of the body of the Sphinx. So I'm keen to learn more about this. If you haven't heard Bernie before, please go back and hear the other two podcasts that we've done, where he talks about the actual hero's journey as well. Because even as Bernie said to myself and Jimmy before we came on air tonight, this is really like the Holy Grail. out of the 3 shows that we've done, because this is, like Bernie says, information that I haven't heard anywhere before. I certainly haven't heard that the time period been opened up to this extent. And I'm very open to hearing what comes next with Bernie Taylor, BeforeOrion.com.
This is the Kev Baker Show.
Welcome back. Bernie Taylor, author of Before Orion, is back with us here. And you can visit his website, BeforeOrion.com. And before the break, he really whetted all our appetites to hear what, in my opinion, is a new theory on me anyway, that Bernie's presenting here tonight. And we're getting into the origins of the Sphinx. And, you know, you can go back those 11,000 years, as is a kind of commonly held idea amongst people like myself for so long. And there's so many people talk about that time period. Along comes Göbekli Tepe as well, similar time period, almost supporting evidence to the theory that's been put to us so many times about the Sphinx. But what if that isn't the case? And tonight we're hearing an alternative origin story for the Sphinx. We've gone back to Atlantis and then further again to the first mention of Atlantis. And we've been doing this with our good friend Bernie Taylor. Bernie, you've got my juices flowing here. We're on Egypt, we're on the Sphinx. You're taking me back further than I've thought before. Over to you, man.
Well, now we're going to go back 34,000 years ago. And on the previous shows, we talked about the gallery of discs, the panel in the El Castillo caves of Spain, northern Spain near Bilbao in the Cantabria region. And on this panel, we talked about all these animals. On one end, we have a man who's a constellation of Hercules. On the other end, we have the man who's a constellation of Orion, and we have animals that intersect between them. And to the north is Hercules, and then we have this Gaia, which is the eagle. We have the Pegasus, the horse. We have Pisces, which is the dolphin. We have Cetus, the seal. Orion, hunter above him. We have the Barbary ape becomes Gemini with the 2 stars, Castor and Pollux as his eyes. We have Leo as the lion. We have Draco as the crocodile becomes Draco. The great auk is Cygnus, and there's a bunch of other ones in there. Well, there's one we didn't talk about in the last show. Okay, we talked about the lion. We said that astronomically we can show that all these constellations were in the night sky as the people have seen 34,000 years ago. But we saw that Leo was in that grouping, and that's the same grouping of constellations as Claudius Ptolemy among the ancient Greeks put into the record that we have today. So somewhere among the ancient Greeks, someone had gone to the cave and they had brought this astronomical record forward. So the Greeks were reinventing something from the distant past, and Claudius Ptolemy was the head librarian of the Library of Alexandria. So he himself may have not have been to the caves, but rather he had the source books. And there was a fellow named Newton, and not the famous astrophysicist Newton, but Newton, another historical astronomer. And he said that Ptolemy was a fraud and he was a fake because he described constellations and astronomical events that he couldn't have seen. But through precession of this wobbling of the Earth, Ptolemy could have been looking at a record from a distant time in a distant place. And so it kind of gives evidence, this whole thing, that we have all the same constellations in this Paleolithic cave as Ptolemy had in the Greek record that he put into Alchemist. But there's another character that overlaps the lion Leo. And that character is the head of the Sphinx. It's the head of the great Sphinx in Egypt. It is the origin. And the defining characteristics are, number one, the Nemes headdress. It comes down the back of the head, if you can pull it up on your YouTube screen. They're both missing a nose. Okay, there's all kinds of stories about ancient Egypt, how Bonaparte shot off the nose and all these things. And no one has any evidence for that stuff. It's purely fantasy. It also has that square jaw, and if you look at not just the square jaw, but it has the same lines around the mouth area. And on the forehead has that same teardrop shape. Okay, so the Giza Sphinx was a remodeling of this Sphinx that they found in the El Castillo cave. It also has that same flat face, which is kind of curious. You know why? You know, people. If you look at the Giza Sphinx, you know the face is really of a human, but it doesn't have that same round curvature of humans. It looks like it's been squashed by a tennis racket or something. And so we're looking at, this is the origin of the two. What the ancient Egyptians, or somebody in ancient times, I'm not sure if it was Egyptians, dynastic Egyptians anyway, what they do is they reshape the face a little bit to make it more human-like. But those same characteristics, especially the Nemes, is still there. And the Nemes was, I don't believe, was ever intended to be as part of the Sphinx. The Nemes is actually an overlapping of another animal, which is the head of the elephant. Okay, the head of the elephant, it becomes the Nemes of the El Castillo Sphinx, which ultimately the ancient Egyptians took as create this headdress of pharaonic power. Okay, so we can go back in time now, and we can see an actual origin 34,000 years ago of this Egyptian Sphinx, which completely changes the record. So we can't say that there was an Atlantis culture that invented all this stuff 12,000 years ago, because it goes back 34,000 years ago. So what are these people 34,000 years ago, this amazing Atlantis culture? They were cave people. They were incredible artists, and they were brilliant astronomers. And they mapped their sky, which was a reflection of the earth. So all those animals and people from north to south, well, actually I said the animals from north to south, are the same ones in the order as you would have found on land. So the north, you find the horse, you find the Iberian lynx. And in the south, you find the giraffe, and you find the Barbary ape, and the lion with the mane, and the mongoose, and a bunch of others. And so the earth was a reflection of the night sky and vice versa. And they navigated from north to south, both on the stars and the animals they saw in their environment. So Jimmy, if you jumped out of an airplane and your airplane got lost and for a day or so, and you jumped out and you landed in the woods and bamboo, and you saw some panda, where do you think you are?
Japan.
Well, panda, you think it could be. Well, if in the wild, it would have to be China. But you could jump out, land in the zoo in Japan, and you would definitely find a panda. Or the DC's the Smithsonian Zoo, I believe, has a panda. But anyway, we designate animals in our world by what we find in our natural environments. The United States is the bald eagle, and Russia is the bear. China is the panda, and so they were doing the exact same thing. They were identifying with the animal's environment as spiritual helpers, and to assist them on that journey through time and space. So we can say that 34,000 years ago, we've got this image of the night sky. And we've got all these animals. And we've got this caveman, this brilliant caveman, absolute genius, who made the original Sphinx. But he didn't have a crystal ray gun. He didn't have a UFO spaceship. He didn't have a laptop and he didn't have a mobile phone, and he didn't have any great mind control that he was lifting great rocks like the Giza pyramids. And it changes. We have to say that there were people, there were geniuses. If they're geniuses today, could be geniuses tens of thousands of years ago. And this person who engraved this image and shaded it with the red disc and some little black, that person was an absolute genius. It doesn't mean they were this Atlantis culture that had ray guns and all the rest of it. So is that a different story than you've heard before, Kev?
Yeah, definitely. This is a new one and a good one on me, man. Absolutely. And, looking at the cave art where you've got the flat face and you compare it to the flat face of the Sphinx as well, from the cave to the face, I definitely see the similarities going on here as well. Definitely see it.
Yeah. Jimmy, what's going on in your mind now? We're rewriting the book.
We are rewriting the book. And, I've always sort of been of the mind that the representation of the lion is an important figure throughout history. And I see a transposition of the lion in Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ as the lion, and the age of Leo going into the age of Aquarius, and the age of Jesus Christ coming to an end, and the new age coming in is what I sort of put together through hearing a bunch of discussions about it.
So that's the story of Narnia, right? That's the motif from Narnia.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting representation, just simply because of where we are right now in today's history, because we are at a moment in time, and everything seems to point back towards Atlantis for some reason. And now there's been a lot of discussion of this Tartaria and this mud flood that I've been hearing about. But what you're talking about, genius isn't necessarily reflected in skyscrapers and computers. Genius is reflected in artwork, and different different civilizations had a value system that was different. So maybe, I mean, when you look at modern civilization, I'd rather be living in a cave, and hunting for my own food, and being responsible for my own self, and being able to be an artist 24 hours a day, do whatever I want, create whatever I want, because my value system is that way. But that doesn't supply me with my income. So I have to be in the urban jungle now. So, I mean, at some point, the value system that you're talking about and the genius and the work that you're talking about is, I think it's a really powerful way of looking at it.
Absolutely. And that genius, well said, that genius didn't emerge in the Greater Sahara region in rock art until about 12,000 years ago. 12,000 years ago, cave art, around 10, 12,000, ends in Europe. They stopped making the art in the caves. But then it shows up in the Greater Sahara in a huge way, life-size giraffes and elephants and so forth. And so the people that left the Paleolithic caves, they migrated to the Greater Sahara region. And we also have 34,000 years ago, they were going back and forth. 34,000 years ago, they traveled from the Iberian Peninsula, they swam across the Strait of Gibraltar, and they landed in West North Africa. And remember what we talked about that was in West North Africa? The big mountain.
Yep.
Atlas. Geopolitics, the tallest mountain in North Africa, is in Morocco. You could walk there a few days from the coast. You actually swim across Strait of Gibraltar in 3 hours if you're a good swimmer. And a few days you could be walking and standing right at Geopolitics. Exactly where this cave image draws us, from the north to the south.
No, absolutely. I'm just sitting here hanging on. This is what happens when you can come on here, Bernie. I'm waiting for you to continue this story.
I know it's hard. It's hard to be on with Bernie because I'm just listening to you, you're making me think. So it's hard to say anything because I'm where I would be if I was a listener right now. So wow, what a great topic! I'm so happy you're here.
So I gave you guys a little thinking pause time there. Okay.
Yeah, well, usually, I mean, as a show host, I'm not giving away any secrets here, but it's kind of easy, my job, really, because you know, usually, unless you've got a very first-time guest that hasn't been anywhere else, you can pretty much go and research the story, the theory that they're kind of putting out there. But I seen maybe a 2-minute video you'd put on your YouTube channel today, and that was about it. So tonight, this is totally learning cap stuff for me, and as a host, I mean, it's like a whole new ball game.
So remember, we were earlier talking about the characters on the Scalar disc, and to the north we had Hercules, and the south we had Orion, so they're actually the same character on this journey. In the second from last epic or labor of Hercules, you know what mountain he climbs?
Atlas.
He climbs Atlas. He climbs Atlas. He climbs to the same place as we find this character traveling in the cave image. So the Greeks borrowed the same character. Okay, they took the story of Hercules who takes this journey, who travels across the Strait of Gibraltar. He lands in Africa, and he climbs the mountain. And that is the so-called mount we call Geopolitics today. It is Mount Atlas. It is the mountain that Herodotus that said the people themselves called themselves Atlantes.
See, that's the bit.
So was there this great Atlantic civilization, Atlantis civilization? The answer is, in the mind, in this genius of this cave artist, there was. But you got to skip the metal, the ray guns, the magic crystals, the spaceships, and whatever else are people, the huge sailing ships and the hovercraft that skimmed across the water and
blue chickens,
all that sort of stuff. So everything ties together. The Greeks had it in the myths. They had the constellations of Hercules. He travels across the Strait of Gibraltar. He lands in West North Africa, and he climbs Mount Atlas, where he meets Atlas himself. And at the top of Mount Atlas, he negotiates with him to get the golden apples. And so, because Hercules himself can't retrieve the apples by himself, so Hercules holds up the sky during that time when Atlas goes to get the apples, and then Atlas comes back again, and he says, I'm very glad that you, Hercules, are holding up the sky for me. It's been a pretty heavy load. And so Hercules says, okay, I'll agree to do this, but can you just hold it a little for a second so I can reshift it? And so he gives him the apples, the Titan Atlas puts it back on his shoulder, and Hercules takes off. Okay, basically disappears, which is how Atlas still has the sky upon his shoulder. So you would have the sky. The Titan Atlas really didn't have the sky upon his shoulder. He was at such a high point on this mountain that everything above him was the sky. So the man himself, the face of Atlas, the Atlas face is the mountain. There's a story before Hercules, which is quite interesting. And it's the story of Perseus. And Perseus, he cuts off the head of Medusa, the Gorgon Medusa. And the myth of Medusa was Medusa, if you looked into her eyes, you would turn to stone. And so Perseus climbs Mount Atlas, just like Hercules does. And he pulls the head of Medusa outside of a bag, and he shines it in the face of Atlas. And Atlas turns to stone. So the face of the mountain, the top of Mount Atlas, is Atlas himself. That's the Greek myth. That's what it's telling us. And it became that face through the Gorgon Medusa. The Greeks had to explain why do these tops of these mountains look like people? And it's through the Gorgon Medusa.
Bernie.
And then Hercules, who's a cousin of Perseus, then travels. So the whole story about Titan Atlas actually going off can't be really correct, because he was already turned to stone when Hercules arrived.
You see, this is where the magic happens on the Kev Baker Show, because there's absolutely always a synchronicity from one show to the next. I call it the golden thread that ties everything together. And I don't know how I do it, because last night, randomly off the top of my head, because of everything going on in the media, went to talk about this new Momo challenge, the thing that everyone's talking about, with Ryan Gable. And Ryan was getting into some historical, mythological characters, and Medusa came up in the conversation. Little did I know that speaking to you tonight would be speaking about the very same character. It's just weird how things work on here. So that's my kind of
I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah, that's my almost an indication that we're on a right path here. There's something going on. I work with a lot of gut feeling. The universe works in mysterious ways, that sort of thing, Bernie. And that for me is definitely confirmation that we need to put this information out there for people to hear.
So the name Medusa is the equivalent of like Susan or Sally or Jane in and around Mount Atlas. It's a commonly used name. Of course, it's not a name that we use because people would think of the monster, but for them, it's commonplace. Remember in the last show we talked about we talked about the cosmic mountain that the hero climbs.
Yeah.
Hercules climbs the cosmic mountain. The hero on this journey who leaves this Paleolithic cave walks down the Iberian Peninsula, swims across the Strait of Gibraltar, travels to Jebel Tobakal. He climbs the cosmic mountain. That is that original cosmic mountain. A few years ago, I was on an airplane. I think I told this story before. And there's a shamanic man next to me. This is maybe 20 years ago, and I wasn't really thinking about these sort of things, at least not consciously thinking about it. And he said to me that he was a shaman, and that there was a movement of these shamans around the world to tie together, where is that original cosmic mountain? And they were seeing it in their dreams, in the same way that Jung said, the Swiss psychologist Jung said, that the most two common, most non-organic characters or symbols in dreams are the mountain and the water of transformation. And so these shamans were having those same dreams. And they were coming together around the world to find that cosmic mountain. What was that original place? Where is it that we first transcended to reach the sky? That we connected with the heaven? That we touched the hand of God, per se? And in this story, this Paleolithic story from 34,000 years ago, we're seeing this journey, and we're seeing that cosmic mountain. The cosmic mountain that the Greeks told about. And that I believe that shaman on the airplane, they may have ultimately found by exploring the dreams of man to see where we come from. Now, in that last show, I think we also talked about Jebel Irhoud. Jebel Irhoud is kind of a hill in Morocco. And the fossils were discovered, human fossils were discovered in it like maybe 20, 30 years ago. And they dated them to maybe 150,000 years ago, kind of significant. Homo sapiens at that time, they kind of looked like Neanderthals, but ultimately decided that they weren't. About a year and a half ago, they made a big find in Jebel Irhoud. Now, remember, this is a place that's within a few days' walk of Jebel Tobakal, Mount Atlas. And the find was, and this is in Science and Nature and all the major journals, that the oldest Homo sapien remains are there from 300,000 years ago.
Well, see, here we go into these hundreds of thousands of years again. I'm liking this.
Totally changed. No one was looking there, because the story of looking for the oldest remains were where there were the most apes. And so Darwin said that we must have emerged from Africa. That's good. We evolved from apes. And then Leakey and friends went down to Eastern Africa, Southeastern Africa, where he got the permits to look for the fossils. But they weren't looking in North Africa. And now that we finally stumbled on more bones and better ways fossils and better ways to date them, and we push it back now to 300,000 years ago. So the original cosmic mountain that I would say is original cosmic mountain is Atlas, Jebel Irhoud, is within walking distance Jebel Tobakal is the cosmic mountain. Atlas is within walking distance to Jebel Irhoud, which is the oldest place that we have that Homo sapiens have been.
Wow, I mean, I think you make a good case, especially when you bring in that kind of time period for Homo sapiens, the remains being found, and this being this kind of this original kind of hero journey, the Mount.
He took the Paleolithic artist, his great descendants came from Western North Africa. And the journey is to return back again to visit that place of his origin. And the same we go to Disney World or Disneyland here in the United States. Or you maybe go to your Disney World. Okay. Or Stonehenge, right?
Stonehenge, that's our kind of stone kind of Disney World. But I know Jimmy wants to jump in with something here quickly, Bernie, before we maybe go too far off track.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Darwinism and the theory of evolution saying we came out of somewhere as a monkey, out of the jungles, and we evolved is, first of all, there's no direct evidence that even happened, because, I mean, the bone that they used to prove it was proven to be a fake pig bone. So I think what you're saying becomes even more powerful in light of knowing that, Darwin didn't have any direct evidence for evolution.
He never had it. And evolutionary biologists will pretty much say the same thing. They'll talk about DNA and they'll talk about DNA. But we never found the missing links. And I believe the missing links was not specifically a bone, but rather a change in psychology, which we can talk about at another show. And that's that Drake equation show, right?
Yeah, definitely. I'm looking forward to that one
that's
already.
A different show.
Yeah,
we'll go there.
Aliens without aliens.
So the start of this, I would say the origin of this whole thing, actually now the archaeological record says the origin of the whole thing is West North Africa. And that's where the hero travels. And that's where the Greeks recognized that Hercules traveled. He traveled across the Strait of Gibraltar. He climbed Mount Atlas to encounter the Titan Atlas, to retrieve the golden apples. It's the story. We all know this story. And Herodotus said those were the Atlantes. And he also said about the people, it was a place that they didn't eat any type of living thing, meaning they were vegetarians. And they were a place where people never dreamed. And we talked about it in the last show too. Because you don't dream about the love of your life if she's next to you in bed. You don't dream about some great expectation if you've already achieved it. You don't dream about the cosmic mountain if you're already there.
That's very true.
And this is your ponder moment, guys.
Yeah, Jimmy's looking as if he's lost for words as well. So
I was just thinking, that's
our number 2 already on today's show with our very special guest, Bernie Taylor. We are rewriting the book. We're taking everything we know, we've ripped it up, and we're starting again. It's been brilliant so far, and so much more to come. We're going to be heading from that mountain back to the Sphinx and the origins of the Sphinx. But before I forget, you might think that my work ends here because it's the last show of KBS for the week, but that couldn't be further from the truth, because I'll be back tomorrow night with the team on Freaky Friday. Now, what a day I've got on Saturday. Wow. I've got Nano Girl. I'm going to live stream on YouTube. I'll be on with the guys right after that as well. We'll be breaking down all the madness of the week. But something else that I'll be doing on Saturday that came up today is I'll be pre-recording an interview with my good friend Ryan Gable and, get this, Clyde Lewis. Yeah, so that's on Saturday. I don't know when Ryan's going to be airing that, but I'm absolutely super stoked at that. So hope you can all, I hope you can all join me for any of those upcoming events. And remember, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Get me over that 100,000 mark. That's the aim of the game for 2019. So back to tonight's information with our good friend Bernie Taylor. We're going back.
I just wanted to say about the subscription over at YouTube. I had a dream earlier today when I was sleeping, and I had a dream that you called me and told me that you only needed 300 more people.
Dude, man, if that happens overnight, then that's some Russian bot activity going on there. And you know what happens when Russian bots get involved these days. But
oh, man.
Not good juju. So let's go back to the Sphinx, where there hopefully is no Russian interference going on. But no, all joking aside, Bernie Taylor, welcome back, sir. Hour number 2 already.
We're looking good.
Yeah,
so now
absolutely.
We need to travel back to the Sphinx itself.
Oh, yes, please.
From geopolitics, the Mount Atlas. And the way we're going to do is we're going to travel by the stars and with the animals in the same way the Paleolithic artist did. We're going to go back to that El Castillo cave image. And we see the lion is at the top of that panel. And at the top of the panel, the lion, and superimposed over its head is this Giza Sphinx head that we find, this therianthrope. Now, astronomically, this is a June time period. It was a pre-dawn June night sky, roughly 35,000 years ago. And we know it's June. I don't like to use that word we know, because we truly don't know anything, right? But we can postulate that it's June because some of the animals. There's a lynx, a juvenile lynx kitten that's timed to June. There's a golden eagle, fledgling golden eagle. We can see the down on its side. We can see a bunch of different animals. And the great auk is missing its egg, or has been stolen from him by this cosmic man, Hercules. And again, that's a May-June time period. So we can astronomically time this whole thing to mid to late June, 35,000 years ago. And when we do that, just before dawn, guess what direction the lion is facing?
The east.
He's facing to the east. What direction is the Giza Sphinx facing?
East.
To the east. Absolutely. So does that mean that it's a vernal equinox scene? Just because it's facing east doesn't mean to be the vernal equinox, like the, as the zodiac goes. The answer is no, because Leo could have at different times due to precession, Leo could have faced east outside of the vernal equinox. In this case, in the Paleolithic Cave, 35,000 years ago, near to the summer solstice, Leo is facing east. And so the assumption that has been made with Bouval and friends that the Orion constellation theory is because the line Leo always their timing to the east is always to the vernal equinox. Therefore, the Sphinx is facing east. It must be a vernal equinox scene, and everything lines up. It's not true. On a scale of 1 to 10, the bogus scale, with 10 being bogus and 1 we should probably think about it, it's a 10. It's a solid 10, okay? And we've talked about this in the show. So 35,000 years ago, the lion faces east just before dawn, and as is depicted in this image. And so why is that significant in ancient Egyptians? Why the summer solstice? The summer solstice was their new year. It was when the Nile rose. It was the start of the restart of their calendar. For them, it was all about the summer solstice. And so, yes, they celebrate the equinoxes and the winter solstice and so forth, but their big day was the summer solstice. So somebody borrowed the mythology from a deep important point back to this Paleolithic cave of this midsummer time period. Interesting, right?
Yeah, there's a connection.
So we have more connections. But here's one that the astronomers, their easy criticism. There's many reasons this Orion constellation theory was debunked, but the easy one was the ancient Egyptians or dynastic Egyptians didn't have Leo among the constellations. So if they didn't have Leo in the constellations,
why pay so much homage to it?
Why did they pay so much homage to it? And maybe it wasn't the ancient Egyptians who did this.
You see, now you're getting into. Now this is where I get interested, because I don't think it was the Egyptians that built it. Who built it? I don't know. You know, I'm very open to who may have built it, but you can look at how the building of the pyramids, almost instead of getting better, they went backwards over time. And I think that's because that original knowledge, that original pyramids was never built by them. They were merely trying to replicate it, build that mountain again, Bernie.
Exactly. They're replicating the cosmic mountain with the hero climbs. So 90% of the Great Sphinx at Giza was actually constructed or by the forces of nature. It was finished off by the ancients. So geologically, most of that stuff was done. Going back 800,000 years ago, all the weathering and the fundamental shape. It was touched up, which made the Great Sphinx. So I believe the ancient Egyptians have seen this. I believe the ancient Egyptians had been to El Castillo, but if they had seen this, or the origin of the, actually, I don't believe that. How we define ancient Egyptians? I don't believe that dynastic Egyptians had been to see this El Castillo cave. I believe that somebody deeper in time had been there. We can easily point to the people around geopolitics, and what happened when the Sahara dried up is people moved east and they moved west. And the people that moved west went to Morocco, into the geopolitics area, because it had rivers and still had snow, it was glacial. And the people that moved east went into the Nile. And so this culture, this information was in that time period. I believe that it wasn't the dynastic Egyptians that carved the head of that Sphinx. There was some other culture that came in and just left. They left their mark. And that was, so who was, well, we can trace back to where they went. They had been to the El Castillo cave, because there are so many unique characteristics on that panel that are exactly the same as the Giza Sphinx. But do we have a name? Well, we don't. And it couldn't have been a dynastic Egyptian, because they would have figured out the astronomy pretty quick. Okay? They had Osiris, which was Orion, and they would have recognized Orion. They figured out this whole thing. But they didn't, the dynastic Egyptians didn't have Leo in their record. So it had to be somebody else.
Jimmy?
Jimmy's about to say something.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, what I was going to say was I'm a sculptor, and, you know, I work in clay, and I've worked in stone before. And so what I wanted to say about what you're saying is this, that when I find a piece of stone that I'm going to hit with a hammer and a chisel and try to make something out of it, try to make something out of its existing form, because I sit there and I look at that piece of stone from every single angle until whatever is present in the stone comes out to me. So, for example, maybe I'm looking at a stone and I see an elephant in it. I see the ear, I see the face, I see the trunk coming down. It's not really there, but all I really got to do is sort of accent what's already there. And so this makes what you're saying a tribe of artisan that had a different value system could have easily done what you're saying, I think, with
Absolutely.
the knowledge.
So it's not an incredible monument. It's the reshaping of what nature had already formed. Picasso said that. Picasso said that man first found art by looking at the stones in the same that way you did. By looking at the face of the wall, and something looked like a head of a bison, another like a horse, and he filled out the lines. And that's how sculptors do it. Da Vinci, Michelangelo, they saw, I guess it was Michelangelo saw David, and he brought David forth. In the same way you find the elephants. And so the Sphinx was already there, and someone came by and they reshaped it. Who that was, we don't know, but we can say where they got their idea from.
I just want people to close their eyes, right, and take away all the kind of the detail on the Sphinx as you know it just now, and just picture a scene underwater where you've got giant rocks and the water over years sloshing away, wearing it away. And you get that kind of terrain that you can definitely imagine. Take away the water and you're left with this mound, and somebody comes along, looks at it a certain way, and it's just exactly the thing that they want to depict. If they just shape it, work it, chip into it, that's what we're talking about here. And it's not definitive proof, far from it. However, I can certainly go along and I can see how this process may have taken place.
Absolutely. So it redefines. So now we have an Atlantis that is not the story of Plato and Graham Hancock and friends and Edgar Cayce. We have an Atlantis in a different place. And that those people in that place at Mount Atlas came from Europe 12,000 years ago. And they recreated the rock art there. So we have a migration of people. And then we have a drying up of the Sahara. And we have people that migrated in different directions to where there are water. Of course, the Nile was one of those places. And when they arrived at the Nile, that period, the summer solstice was significant because that was when the Nile rose. And then they took this image that they had from their own record, their own mythology, and they said, "Oh, it lines up to the summer solstice and the Nile, the giver of life. These are the same story," and they put them together. So how old was that? Well, it's different. We can look at it. There's a list of kings in the Egyptian record, and the Egyptian kings goes back for 36,000 years. And it's one of those documents or the topics that Egyptologists. I'm not an anti-Egyptologist person. Okay, I'm not an anti-archaeologist, anthropologist, or anything like that. But it's one of those documents they scratch their head about and they say, how could this all work out? How could we have this 36,000-year-old record? The list of kings. So this is what I think happened. I think that they didn't know that this El Castillo cave was 35,000 years ago. I don't think they knew that because I don't think they understood precession and the difference, how to actually work out the astronomy. It's even tricky to do today with a computer. It's not as cut and dry as people. You can see it on Ancient Aliens and the History Channel. Okay, so what I think happened is that they took these images and they carried them forth, and that they took a guess. They took a wild ass guess and came up with this 36,000 years ago. And maybe they had some records. It's hard to say because we need to see a better line of records. But the ancient Egyptians, 36,000 years ago, are a different line of the people from Paleolithic Europe. So if you're going to have a book of records in ancient Egypt, you can't have it in Egypt 36,000 years ago, goes back to the cave in Spain. You'd have to have it starting at that cave in Spain. And you'd have to have some sort of record going back from 36,000 to 12,000 when they left. And we don't see that sort of record. And so they had something. We don't know what it was, but I don't believe it was precession, because if we go along with Before and Graham Hancock's Orion constellation theory, that they're saying that the precession is against the vernal equinox, which we now see with the Paleolithic Cave image and the Sphinx. It's the summer solstice. And that whole precession thing just doesn't work out. So they had some other way to do it. Maybe it's through myth, maybe it's some sort of story, maybe it's some reciting names, and they created those names into sort of ancient dynasties. But it's unusual. It's so interesting that 36,000 years ago, roughly times to this cave in Spain. Now, John Anthony West, the late John Anthony West, he said that he didn't believe the origin of the Great Sphinx was 12,000 years ago in this whole Atlantic story. He said, if you're going to take the Egyptian at their word, you need to go with this list of kings, which roughly 36,000 years ago. And so before that, on his deathbed, through mutual friends, John Anthony West was able to see some of these images, which validated what he always believed.
Wow.
Yeah. But the question remains: I'm not going to say that this list of kings is not correct, but it's so uncanny, the synchronicity, that you have it the same epic.
Yeah, exactly. And Jimmy, I know you're champing at the bit to get in here.
Yeah, I was doing some research on a subject matter that sort of ties into what you're saying, because I came across some interesting statistical information that there's less than 1% of the bloodlines from Egypt, the people in Egypt have. There's more people in Europe with direct bloodline and DNA ties to Egypt than there is in Egypt itself, which is, it goes kind of to what you're saying, which is interesting to me. I mean, it's just a cross section. You can look it up, and it had to do with Akhenaten, Nefertiti, and there's a talk that there's a specific bloodline directly from Muhammad to the Queen of England, and that's what I was looking at. But it has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but it does, in the sense that it kind of backs up what you're saying about where things came from.
The region of what we call ancient Egypt today was a place of transition, where cultures had come and gone through. Cultures that had come from Eastern Africa, Southeast Africa, traveled through to go to the Middle East. People that had traveled, that had been pushed from the drying of the Sahara towards the Nile or to Geological, that region around Morocco. So it was an area when we talk about ancient Egyptians. It's really a hodgepodge of people from all these different places. And so we can see in the historical record, the archaeological record, 4,000 years or so. But for tens of thousands of years before that, the food was there. The water was there. People were going there, and people were leaving from there. It was Grand Central in New York City over longer periods of time. It was a transit point. So who were the people specifically? Well, we can tie them to the people of Morocco who had come from Europe, from the Iberian Peninsula, had made this cave art. So we can make that connection there, but we can't put a DNA trail on them, and we really can't tell. We can't put a date on this thing. because the dynastic Egyptians didn't recognize Leo as a constellation. But Leo is the constellation of the Paleolithic record facing east at the summer solstice, whereas the Sphinx is also facing east at the summer solstice.
See, this
So
definitely.
somebody else inserted their mythology.
I was going to say this definitely makes a better case for it not being the Egyptians that built all of these monuments on the Giza plateau. I definitely see where you're coming from there, Bernie. Especially, you know, and of course I'll need to check into this myself. Not that I doubt you in any way, but I find this fascinating. The fact that, you know, if the Egyptians didn't have Leo at that time, it makes no sense that they would have built this thing. You know,
yeah, it makes no sense. It also makes
anyway.
sense for Robert Duvall's Orion constellation theory either. And so the question is, who were these people? And what I believe, okay, and as I said, well, first of all, this conversation is more about the Great Sphinx. The pyramid themselves, I have no opinion on, okay? I haven't studied the question, other than them being cosmic mountains that the hero climbs to ascend to the next world. I have no opinion. And after there was a time that the Egyptian pyramids ended, and they went into the Valley of the Kings. They built chambers in the earth, in the mountain. And at the top, there's a peak above the Valley of the Kings that has that same conical shape as a pyramid. And by the way, here's another one for you guys. So ponder over. The El Castillo cave, this gallery of discus, is in the mountain. And the shape of the mountain is conical. Looks just like a pyramid.
Yo.
Just like a pyramid. Doesn't look like Geological, I can tell you that.
No, you see a lot of these pyramids around the world that might not be recognized as pyramids, but certainly pyramid shaped.
So it's conical. It's a natural geological shaped mountain that's conical shaped. And so I have no opinion on who made the Egyptian pyramids or the timing of the Egyptian pyramids, but I have a definite opinion on an origin of the Great Sphinx at Giza. So when we go into, there's other people who have sphinxes. So the Greeks had the Sphinx. In fact, the story of Oedipus with the Sphinx comes from the Greeks. And the Greeks' imagery of their Sphinx is not as this crouching lion. It's as a sitting Sphinx. Okay? That's really important because I said that the superimposed Sphinx head in the El Castillo cave in the Gallery of Dis, this Sphinx head is superimposed over this lion. Well, that Sphinx actually has a body. And I call it the large carnivore in my images. That body is in a sitting position in the same way as the Greeks depicted their Sphinx. So the Greeks and this individual who made the Great Sphinx image came from two different lines.
Well, you know,
one
Bernie,
came from the crouching lion, and the other came from the sitting carnivore.
Bernie, I'm looking at this large carnivore, 34,000 years ago on the El Castillo cave, and I'm looking at the Greek Sphinx statue. It's really hard to separate the two, really. And I know,
really hard to separate.
I know that our brains, you know, they work on patterns and they try and find the familiarity. I get that, I do, and I'm taking that into account. But this is it's quite weird. It's strikingly similar, shall we say?
So two different people had seen the same image and walked away with their own interpretation.
Yeah.
And that's the story. That's it. And so the Greeks, you know, the story of Hercules, as we tell it, or as we've heard it, comes from the ancient Greeks. And Claudius Ptolemy, we talked about the astronomer who basically lifted this and all the constellations from this Paleolithic cave image and put it into the scientific record or the astronomical record. So the Greeks had been there. We have a record of that. We don't have independent record that the Egyptians had been there, or pre-dynastic or before dynastic Egyptians. But we do have a record of the Greeks have been in here. They could have seen this. Like, so they did see it. They couldn't have seen it. They did see it because Ptolemy walked away with the whole kit. So the Egyptian Sphinx comes up is very. I'm sorry. Both the Egyptian and the Greek Sphinx are interesting because they're both therianthropes. They're a mix between the human and the animal. And on this Paleolithic cave image, El Castillo, there's lots of mixes of humans and animals with therianthrope. There's a man who overlaps with the dolphin to become a merman. There's the man overlaps with the horse. Actually, the eagle overlaps with the horse to become Pegasus. And the man overlaps with that same horse to become Sagittarius or a centaur. Okay? So this concept of the therianthropes derives from these Paleolithic caves. And I don't believe that Paleolithic cave artists believe that a man was an actual centaur. But what I believe that in the same that we think of Batman and Spider-Man as gaining the spirit of the animal, gaining their strength to help the individual on their journey. Well, when the Greeks saw it, and this origin, the ancestor origin of the Great Sphinx at Giza, they looked at it and said, "Oh my God, there were mermen in the past. There was this Sphinx character. There was this Birdman, which they also Zeus transitions between the Earth and the sky worlds as an eagle, and they saw all these characters that overlapped with the animals, and they walked away and say, this was something that happened in the past. This was real. And we don't have these animals walking around among us today. But if just as there's a lion on an image, and just as there's a Barbary ape and a giraffe, there was a centaur, and there was a merman.
I tell you what, with the advancements in DNA technology, CRISPR-Cas9, let's be careful what we wish for here, because mermen and and flying horses and things like that's not a stretch of the imagination anymore, Bernie. We'll be back. We'll be back after the break.
We've got now carrying the malaria.
One more segment. We'll be right back.
This is the Kev Baker Show.
Final segment with our special guest, and what a brilliant show it's been with Bernie Taylor. Before Orion.com. Please check it out. And we often get into the subjects we're touching on here tonight, Atlantis, Egypt, all the time on Freaky Friday. And I've really had to take some notes on the fly here. I was telling Bernie as well, I'm going to have to go back and re-listen to this, because I myself, I'd be a hypocrite if I didn't bring up the fact that I often go back to that 11,000 kind of year time frame for the stuff going on at Göbekli Tepe, evidence of this ancient, advanced civilization. Yet tonight, we've really taken in a lot of information that we have to consider. So I, for one, I'm going to have to re-listen to the information, and I urge all of you as well, just give it a listen, write down some notes, go and check things out for yourself, because I love when you get new information. And it really challenges anything that you already believe to be true. And I've been kind of set in my ways with the Göbekli Tepe 11,000 year thing. And that's not to knock where I took that information from, but we've always got to look at the other information that comes in as well. We can't close our minds to counter theories, to counter information that may go against what we already think. This is what it's all about. We're meant to be learning. We're meant to be getting to the truth. And Bernie Taylor, if this is a taboo topic, and I certainly haven't heard it bandied about that often, it certainly tells me there must be something here that people don't want to be heard. And that's why I like having this show, so I can give you and others a platform to get this out there so people can take it away and decide for themselves.
Absolutely, thanks. And the first program I was on, that was about a year ago, we talked about the hero's journey and this Paleolithic cave image where the man travels from the north to the south, and he draws the spirit of the strength of all these animals, and the merman and the centaur and so forth, and he learns about the empathetic all the mother animals that take care of the juveniles and so forth. And this also tells us what this great Sphinx at Giza and those pyramids are all about. Because on the journey, we're talking about this hero's journey to the cosmic mountain. And on this journey, the hero gains the strengths of the animal. He transforms into the therianthrope. the mix between man and beast, which is in fact what the Great Sphinx at Giza is. And just sitting at the base of that cosmic mountain, the pyramids, is the Great Sphinx. And so what we're looking at here is, I can't tell you that the pyramids were a tomb or not or so on, but I can say that this is part of the journey of the ancient Egyptians, the pharaohs, their spiritual journey at the end to climb that cosmic mountain and gain the strength of the animals to get there. The same cosmic mountain that Hercules climbed to retrieve the golden apples.
And I think, I mean, it's just my speculation. I'll get Jimmy's here as well. I think we're looking at separate kind of builds. You've got the Sphinx, obviously, in its original form when that was put there. We're going back further in this theory tonight. And then it feels to me, just personally, I've never been there, but it feels like the pyramids themselves, they're more technologically advanced as opposed to manipulating the environment and the surroundings around them. Something very machine-like about that building. That's the kind of road we sometimes go down on here. But Jimmy, what's your take on, you know, the kind of build periods, who may have been responsible? What's your speculation?
Well, I mean, honestly, I've always been of the mind that it was done by a civilization that's no longer here. I think there was remnants of that civilization, and they were taught by a specific person that was a remnant, and they were dispatched to different parts of the earth. They were known as priests of the temple. But what you're saying about the hero's journey to the top of the mountain, there was also the inverse journey that was part of the initiatory process of some of the civilizations that were, or some of the Egyptian portions of their civilization did go through initiatory process that involved being in the underground also, and to have to make your way out of the underground through this initiatory process of overcoming obstacles in the dark, refusing the crown, some of these type things. I think the icon of the pyramid is represented in so many places, even down to the tetrahedron. It's just, it's an amazing place to go to try to put these things together based on limited information. You know, there's two kinds of people. Those who can extrapolate information from, extrapolate something from limited information.
So Jimmy, you're spot on two things. First is that, so the hero on his journey goes to that place of death. The shaman goes into the other world. And that's what these Paleolithic cave artists did. At least the apprentice did when he went into the cave. He went, these images where we find these characters are always the deepest part of the caves. Hercules himself, on his last labor, he goes into the cave and he wrestles with the Cerberus. And he meets the ghosts and heroes and monsters of the past. But he returns from the dead. So that is also part of the ancient Egyptian journey as well. And in these pyramids, we find caves. We find portals to the other world. And so they're creating these cosmic mountains with the caves inside them. And the Valley of the Kings, they have this, again, this natural form cosmic mountain, and they built the caves inside it. And so what were the pyramids themselves? The place of death? Well, maybe the chambers within them they were. But they still had to, on their journey, they still had to climb that cosmic mountain. That cosmic mountain that we find all over the world. Wherever you go, someone's got a cosmic mountain. I live here in Oregon. Klamath is the cosmic mountain. And Mount Shasta in Klamath is the cosmic mountain. You know, it's in India, Hindi people, it was Meru, where Shiva sits. To the Olympians, it was Mount Olympus, where the gods held. And in Japan, it's what's the mountain in Japan? The big one.
It's the one Jimmy landed on the panda.
Fuji.
Fuji. For the Japanese, it's Fuji, and to people, to Tibetans, it's Everest. Where Everest, at the top of Everest, is where the gods are. And so we go around the world, you will find these cosmic mountains. What? And if you don't have a cosmic mountain, you make one. And that's what they did with the pyramids. That's what they did in the Mayan pyramids, from the pyramids as well.
If the mountain if Muhammad won't go to the mountain, bring the mountain to Muhammad.
Exactly. And in Islamic mythology, there is a cosmic mountain that they have a name for, but they can't say where it is. So somewhere deeper in their myth, they've got that cosmic mountain. And so at the start of the show, Kev said he's drawn to Egypt and he's drawn to those images that they speak to him. I haven't been to Giza or Egypt per se, but people who do go there, they talk about it being spiritual, and something's drawing them to those pyramids. It's the same way that we pull over the side of the roads to look at a mountain. The same way, if you're going to draw, you're in school, you're going to draw your first landscape scene, most likely you're going to draw a river or lake and a mountain behind it. You walk into any elementary school and you say littered, because we're drawn to it in the same way Swiss psychologist Jung said the two most common non-organic motifs were the mountain and the water of transformation. And at Egypt, at Giza, we find the Nile, we find that water transformation, we find the cosmic mountain, and we find the hero on his journey in the therianthrope, the lion that gives him the strength, the lion of pharaonic power. And that, I believe, is the story of Giza.
Oh, lots to think about here. I'm liking this, Jimmy. But this is definitely, like I was saying when you were away during the break, Jim, this is one I'm going to have to listen to again and again, I think, because so much more information, so much more you have to expand your mind now, and I like that. Always like that.
Yeah, I mean, this is such an interesting topic of discussion because, you can see the representation of the mountain in across the planet, different civilizations constructing different things, whether they were mimicking what they saw at some point, or whether they were bringing to bear what some traveler brought to this civilizations. These different places, these people just kind of showed up. You see these tribes that, for example, the Hyksos.
And Jimmy, this mountain, you've got, Moses goes up the mountain, gets the commandments, touches the gods. It's the same thing.
It's true. And it's just like you guys were saying that, the mountain, it doesn't necessarily have to be the physical mountain, because at some point man realized that he didn't have to physically climb the mountain, that he could actually go to the mountain within himself. And because ultimately the mountain and the hero's journey on the mountain is the realization of being able to achieve oneness or some sort of a spiritual connection, like you're saying, because these people had to go high. The higher up they went, the higher their vibration was, the closer they were to the heavens, and there was no interference. I mean, I've been to the top of the Rocky Mountains. I've been skiing on a mountain called Copper Mountain, and when I got to the top of that lift, there was no other place higher than I was anywhere in the United States. And I looked around, and I've never seen a view like that before in my life. And so I can understand the hero's journey to the top of the mountain, because if I had to climb that mountain, foot and cane, it would be worth it. And when I got to the top, if that was my last dying breath, I would be someplace that I was at a higher, altitude even. The whole way you feel up on the top of the mountain, Bernie, is
and the earliest remains that we have of Homo sapiens are at Jebel Erhud in Morocco 300,000 years ago. A short walk from Jebel Tobakal, Mount Atlas. So as far as we know, as far as we can determine, the earliest point of humanity is at the tallest mountain in North Africa. And so if people had spread around the world from that point 300,000 years ago, we would retain that mountain in our myths and in our dreams. And that mountain that Herodotus said that people never dreamed, because they were already at the cosmic mountain.
Wow.
There we are, Kev.
No, I'm just sitting here, just
I'm
wow.
speechless.
Yeah.
It all ties together.
That's what.
Someday, guys, after you read the last chapter of the book,
Well, that's our
we
mission.
can actually
Yeah,
talk about
that's our
the
homework.
images of Jebel Tobakal.
Yeah, because
how they connect with these images that we're looking at right now.
that's basically our homework before the.
That's your homework.
Yeah, we're gonna, myself and Jimmy, digest the book, and Bernie's never spoke about the last chapter, and he refuses to do so, rightly, until he's on a show where the host or hosts have both read the entire book. So I think that's the very least that myself and Jimmy can do to get to the even deeper stuff about how this story ends. Really looking forward to that. And you were also telling us, that we're going to do a show about aliens.
We're not aliens. We're going to talk about the Drake equation.
Yeah, but it's a show about aliens without aliens.
Exactly, yes.
I like that. Definitely something to look forward to, man.
I'm not an alien guy. And so we're going to talk about hypothesis. We're going to talk about the Drake equation.
See, I am an alien guy.
Hypothesizes intelligent life elsewhere.
See, I am
and whether that's possible.
Yeah, I'm an alien guy, but I mean, I'm absolutely, like I was saying about that, this might counter some of the ideas that people have about Egypt previously. I think it's important to speak to people that have different opinions, different ideas. Absolutely. So, no, I'm definitely looking forward to that. And the Drake equation, that's something I got into with your good friend. Oh, and his name escapes me now. The young astrophysicist, was it Brendan
Drackler.
That's the one, Brendan Drackler. Now, he is an absolutely fantastic young guy. What a show I had with him. But yeah, we spoke about the Drake equation on there, and he was telling me how, he sometimes is in the place where they literally came up with the Drake equation. So yeah, looking forward to that. So what else are you kind of working on?
Well, shout out to, we mentioned a few names on the program tonight, Hancock, Boval, and Shock. This is a shout out. Let's have a discussion on the Kev Baker Show about this. Let's talk about their Orion constellation theory.
Let's certainly open to that. Yeah.
The origin of the Sphinx. Let's have a real discussion.
I would certainly be open to hosting that. I can certainly make space in the diary. That'd be good, though. It really would be good.
I'll make some space in my calendar, too.
However, I don't think we should hold our breath on that one. This is the kind of thing where you don't... But it's the kind of thing where people, they don't want their theory challenged, and that's no disrespect to any of the characters you've mentioned there. Again, I'd be a hypocrite because I've gone with a lot of the research they've put out there, and again, I'm not dismissing all of their research on the back of what you've told me here, Bernie, but I'm keeping my mind open. I'm going to read this book, and I'm certainly going to look into the stuff that you've told me here as well.
We're retelling an old myth, the story of Hercules, of the hero's journey. I believe that in our great descendants will be on some sort of a podcast talking about these same subjects, and they'll be debating the same issues, and they'll be talking about the hero's journey and the cosmic mountain and these dreams and the river transformation and the Sphinx and what we've learned. And Jimmy had it right on. He was talking about the dreams. And the story of the cosmic mountain is really an inward journey. And that was the work of Jung. And that's why we dream about it. We're struggling with our minds. And we in the previous show, we talked about Billy Joel and the River of Dreams. And he's afraid to cross over the water. It's too deep. And on the other side of the water are the mountains of faith. And we talk about those motifs, those archetypes in the collective unconscious. And we find them in these same images, the same Giza, at the Giza Plateau and the Great Sphinx and the pyramids. And we find it at Geological where the hero climbs. And we find it at El Castillo on the Scour Disc.
Well, I'll let you
That
into a
dates
little
back-
secret, because throughout this entire show, that little voice in my head, the one that kind of plays back songs and things, because of Billy Joel in the last show that we've done, and we've been talking about the mountain so many times tonight, that song has been playing and playing and playing in my head for the entire show. So, yeah, definitely. It's funny you should bring that up right towards the end here. And Jimmy, remember Bernie was trying to get us to actually sing that song on air? That would have sounded like a bag of cats, man.
It would have. You know, you had brought up Plato earlier, and there's it. I mean, I was just thinking of it a minute ago, which was you were talking about Atlantis, but he also had something called the cave,
Yes.
which is you know, it's an interesting piece of work in that you can see that prevalent throughout our society, that storyline.
Absolutely. That'd be a good topic. Plato's cave, the allegory of Plato's cave. Yeah, that's a show in itself, and society, and what we, if it's outside our cave, can it truly be there? And when we live in, if we're in our own cave, and what we see is what we project as our reality, when we go out to another world, that must be false, because it's not what we originally, where we came from. And
what we think about the world creates the world. It's not necessarily the world that we step into.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. It's brilliant. That's a show in itself to talk about Plato's cave, and great thinkers in the distant past. And I'm not talking about just Plato. I'm talking about 34,000 years ago. Geniuses that Jimmy, you looked at this image. Could you imagine have done that 10 meters across? Can you imagine have done that with all the overlapping characters that were the constellations before the Big Bang?
No.
Is there any artist that you could imagine could have done that in historical times?
No. And I think, you know, that's because, like we were saying earlier, you know, value systems are not necessarily what we have today. In other words, we didn't put our creative energy into somebody else's dream and get paid, you know, some dollars for it. You know, we valued things that were of beauty and artwork and knowledge. And, you know, that's all been turned around on us to the point where, you know, all we are doing is seeing shadows from the fire on the cave wall. And we run around in fear of what those shadows might actually be. And when we don't realize that, you know, there are shadows, we're afraid of ourselves because we don't have what it takes to get up that mountain sometimes. It's hard to climb that mountain. You know, a lot of people say the word enlightenment, and what they're talking about is illumination, because there's a Buddhist little story, and the Buddha is walking up a mountain, and his Sherpa is behind him, and he's carrying all his load, and the Buddha's carrying nothing. And so as they're walking up the mountain, the Sherpa says to the Buddha, what is enlightenment? And the Buddha looks down at him and asks him to take off the backpack. And as he sets it down on the ground, he says, that is enlightenment. So enlightenment is not illumination. Enlightenment is releasing yourself from the load so that you can climb that mountain and be that hero that Bernie's talking about, that's been represented so strongly throughout antiquity. These stories are prevalent for a reason, because we have to overcome certain things in life in order to transcend spiritually, to be released from the bondage of this reality that we're living in.
Jimmy's just been released from Plato's cave. He's on fire tonight, man. You see, Bernie, you really do bring out the best in Jimmy Jeans here. I have to thank you for that. I have to thank you as well, Jimmy, because I mean, Bernie, this has been really, really good. And when you told me last time we were going to get into the Sphinx, that was really exciting in the first place. But I really appreciate what you've kind of laid out. You've taken the time aside to come on here today, lay it out for myself and the audience. It's been absolutely brilliant, man. Thank you very much.
Great show. Would love to be on again and, continue the journey.
Oh, absolutely. We're not even halfway up the mountain yet, pardon the pun. But folks, I've really enjoyed this. I hope you've enjoyed this as well. And don't forget, coming up after tonight's show, we have got Joe Joseph. He will be in the house with the Freedom Link. You know what Joe's like. Who knows what Joe will be getting into tonight? And of course, he'll be warming himself up, probably with Scotty Lopez. Maybe even Jimmy Jeans will be on there as well.
Yeah, I'm gonna be jumping on with Joe.
You're shameless, man. You're really shameless. But no, please stay tuned for that, because it never stops here on TFR. And if you want to support TFR, head on over to the archive page of your favorite show. Doesn't need to be this one. And what you do is you sign up for a subscription. And because we're very unique here, that subscription is split between the host and the network. And that's how we're able to keep on top of all the very best technology, despite the glitches that Skype sometimes brings us. It's the peskiest program in the world, but nothing we can do about that. But yeah, that's all thanks to you out there. And you certainly help to keep the network going. And of course, my own personal crusade, since I came from the world of YouTube, and I'm still over there, obviously, need to get to that 100,000. This is the year. And so far, so good. The curve's kind of going up. I'm liking it. I'm loving the look of it. If things are to go the way they're going right now, you may be talking about 6 months, maybe. We could hit that golden number that I'm really trying to get to. But I think if we push even harder, and we keep on, or if I keep on reminding you out there, new listeners come along, different shows go out, I think we can get there even sooner. So please, please, please head on over there. Click subscribe. Doesn't cost a penny. Just means you get
that's it.
Yeah, it just means you get the latest updates from the Kev Baker Show. Myself, Jimmy, the guys, Johnny Whistles. A big shout out to Johnny Whistles as well. Hope he's feeling okay and he'll be back sometime really soon. Hopefully a bit Freaky Friday with Johnny tomorrow. But yeah, much love to everyone out there. Jimmy Jeans, I heard you trying to jump in there at some point.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, even if you've already subscribed, just tell somebody that to just go over and subscribe. Maybe they're not a subscriber. But, we're just trying to get some numbers over there so Kev can get to the next level and get some clout over at YouTube when he wants to ask a question.
Yeah, you see, I'm not like my favorite politician as much as I truly admire young AOC, and I know that'll trigger people out there. Unlike her, I don't have 600,000 bots retweeting all my stuff on YouTube, on Twitter, and platforms like that. We're doing it real, we're doing it organic, and thanks to real people out there. No bot networks, nothing like that. Just genuinely 7 years to get to 100,000. It's probably a bit slow when you look at the average kind of time, Jimmy, but hey, best things come to those that wait, as they say.
That's right. And hey, is there some place, Bernie, where everybody can get your book?
So it's a ebook wherever you can find it. Before Orion, find Face the Hero. But I have a webpage, beforeorion.com. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, Tumblr, Reddit,
Facebook. He's huge on Facebook.